Okay, guys, this is your first Zoom recording so that you can come back and look at this. What I'll do is I'm going to go through chapter 1, going to hit the highlights. We'll go through it. So what you can do is you can actually follow through on your in your book, which will help kind of cement this information. Of course, now you guys should have been started chapter 1 and chapter 2 already, and there's supposed to be a MyLab and Mastering quiz that you can take now. It should be open for a week. If you can't get into that, let me know, and of course we'll deal with that. Okay. So for the sake of keeping this the same throughout, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And then of course I'm going to drop a Zoom meeting, a live one here pretty soon. Okay. So anyway, so you should be able to still hear me. I got to feed at this other computer over here, so just kind of follow along. Okay, so what is anatomy? Anatomy is structure, physiology is function. So anatomy is the study of internal and external body structures and the physical relationships among other body parts. In contrast, physiology is the study of how living organisms perform their vital functions. All right, so that's anatomy, physiology. Okay. All right. I'm gonna skip over. You guys need to read this stuff, but 15th century, blah blah blah. Almost 200 years past. So this is kind of just filling in the fluff of the textbook. I want to kind of get through the basics. All right. All right. So anatomy. When you look at something, how far away you're from it often determines what you see. Of course, we have different types of anatomy. So we divide the human anatomy into gross and microscopic. Now, gross is the macro, and of course, what does macroscopic mean? Macro means large or the whole thing, what you can see. All right, so in gross anatomy or macroscopic anatomy, that's another name for gross anatomy, is macroscopic, meaning macro being big. Involves examining fairly large structures, from the Latin word term grossus, meaning thick or massive. Right. So we have under gross anatomy, we have surface anatomy, regional anatomy, and systemic anatomy, okay? As well as clinical anatomy and developmental anatomy, like embryology. And of course, embryology is the study of this process of the developing fetus, embryology right here. And that is a very complicated system or study or field of study. We won't really get into embryology in this class. That is something when you specialize or do whatever you're going to do, you'll have to take that class. Microscopic anatomy deals with the structures that we cannot see without magnification. In the school here, we have what we call light microscopes that can magnify up to 400 times. At that point, we can see most of the trillions of cells, well, probably all of them. We can see them, but we can't really see the stuff inside the cells very well. We can see a nucleus, but remember we have trillions of cells in the human body, okay? And the looking at cells is called cytology. So anytime you see cyto or cytology of cells. Histology, histo, this is tissue. So this is the study of tissue. And if you guys have not taken medical terminology, that really is very important. It's not a requirement because you certainly can pick up that as you go through, but at some point you're going to have to do the medical terminology. If you're going to be in medical classes, you might as well get that stuff out of the way. Okay? All right. There, a cadaver's toes there. Okay, physiology. So human physiology is the study of functions or workings of the human body. These functions are complex processes and much more difficult to examine than most anatomical structures. As a result, there are even more specialties in physiology than in anatomy. Cell physiology, organ, systemic physiology, and pathological physiology. Of course, what's a pathology? That is a disease or, you know. All right, so anytime we have disease, look, signs or symptoms. So signs are an objective disease indication like fever, or symptoms are subjective. So what's the difference between objective and subjective? So signs are objective. These are things you can actually measure, read, or mark down, write down. And symptoms such as disease indications such as tiredness. Pain level is something that is definitely subjective. People have pain. They think that a paper cut is a 10 on the scale of 0 to 10. Someone else might think that something that was painful might be your hand is cut off as a 10. Okay, so you can see it's very subjective. So what we do is we turn it into visual analog scale. We give it a number. You'll see that when you get into thing. What's your pain level like today? It's a 10, and it doesn't matter what it is, just so long as it starts to go down as you go through treatment. That's all that really matters. Anyway. All right. What's the scientific method? Is a system of advancing knowledge that begins by proposing a hypothesis to an answer and then testing that. So we do it all the time in my clinic when patients come in to see me. Again, I'm a chiropractor, so I see patients. They come in and see me. I immediately have a hypothesis what's going on. So I use the scientific method all the time. I come up with a hypothesis, and then going through physical exam, X-rays, MRIs, whatever that might be, orthopedic tests, things of that nature. Then I come up with a better diagnosis, and then of course I treat them, and hopefully they get better or feel better. All right, next page. All right, section 1.3, levels of organization progress from chemicals to complete organism. So here's the bullets. So it starts from atoms to cells to tissue to organs, organ systems, and then the organism, which is right here. So let's jump into this. Let me bring this up. There you go. All right, so this is a spotlight. You'll find these throughout your book. They are usually very important. They will help you with the material, okay? Now this right here, this is really important for chapter 1, okay? You're gonna see a lot of information from, on the test will come from this section right here. So again, it starts as atoms, goes to chemical level. Then you see protein filaments, and what they're showing you here, this is actually a muscle fiber. And this is actin, and this is myosin, and this is how muscle contracts. We see cellular level. Of course, this is a heart muscle. This is what we see when we see heart muscle. Then the tissue, so cells, then to tissue, which is a whole bunch of, it's not just muscle cells. There's other tissue involved in cardiac muscle. Then the organ level, that's all of the tissue combined to make an organ. Then the organ system, which is a cardiovascular system. And then all of that combined makes the organism. So this, you can see how we put this in. Is this in the right order? This in the right order. Okay. And then generally, I go through each one of these systems here. All this data here you need to know. So this, all this data, the organs, the major organs. Okay. So major organ systems. All right. So whatever the organs are, and then the functions of them right there. Okay. All right. So as you're looking at that, I'm just gonna turn this see. There's the integumentary system. Okay, so let's go through this quickly. It's there, the data's there. You need to know all this. This is the foundation for your education. This is the foundation for organ systems. So if you don't know where all your organs are in your body, guess what? You need to learn that. You need to learn where all the organs in your body are and the names of the organ systems. And there they are right there. Okay? All right, let's start off with the integumentary system, which is the skin. What are major organs associated with it? So we have skin, hair, sweat glands, and nails. The functions: protects against environmental hazards, helps regulate body temperature, provides sensory information. All right, so the integumentary system is the largest organ in your body. All right, its job is to do what? Protects against environmental hazards, right? Keeps the good stuff in and the bad stuff out. Helps regulate body temperature, right? We sweat. Yeah, okay. Provides sensory information. Of course, everyone knows you can touch stuff, okay? And feel it. All right, next we have the skeletal system. Major organs: the bones, cartilages, associated ligaments, and bone marrow. Okay? What are the functions of this? Provides support and protection from other tissues. Of course, everyone knows it's support, right? Of course it's support. That's how we stand up. But obviously protection too. We have the ribs, which protect our heart and lungs, right? Top of our liver there, and stomach a little bit. Kidneys a little bit in the backside, right? Okay. Brain pan, right? Your skull piece. That guy right there protects your brain, right? And of course, in the back, down the spinal column, to protect the spinal cord as it passes down the descent. Okay. Stores calcium and other minerals. Calcium is just one of many minerals, which we'll talk about, I think, in chemistry when we get there. Stores calcium and other minerals. Forms blood cells. Okay, so the bone marrow actually makes our blood cells. So long bones like our femur and our radius, humerus, these guys actually have marrow inside them. Even the vertebral column, these vertebral bodies down here, they have marrow inside them as well. And of course, that's where we make our blood cell production. Of course, cells like red blood cells, right? White blood cells, which are our immune system. Okay. Right. Muscular, major organs, skeletal muscles, and associated tendons. Provides movement, protection, provides protection and support for other tissues. Generates heat, and maintains body temperature. All right. So skeletal muscles and associated tendons. Now, where would you find ligaments? Ligaments are actually part of bone, right? So ligaments are associated with bone. Ligaments hold bone to bone. Muscles attach muscle to bone. And what does a muscle do? Associated tendons, which then allow for motion, right? Allow for motion of that particular item. All right, so functions: provides movement, provides protection, support for other tissues, generates vital heat. So when you're cold, what do? You shake. When we get into muscle tissue, I'll describe in ad nauseum what happens when we look at the actual contraction cycle and exactly where the heat is generated when we have a muscle contraction. Everybody knows you go to the gym and work out or start running, pretty soon you're sweating, right? Or you're getting ready to take a Dr. Sampson's test and you start shaking, you're creating heat, that's why you get hot. Feel like you're gonna pass out, right? Well, that's other things, but okay. All right, nervous tissue. All right, so nervous tissue is not afraid of anything. It is what we use for sensory information, okay? So major organs are the brain and the spinal cord. Brain and the spinal cord, you see it's a different color here, right? That's because that is the central nervous system. These nerves here that come down to your fingers, down to your toes, this is your peripheral nervous system. So we have a central nervous system and a peripheral nervous system. This is also, this one right here, the central nervous system is also called the axial nervous system. Okay? All right, so major organs, mosquito, thank you very much. All right, brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves, and sense organs. Functions: direct immediate response to stimuli, coordinates and moderates activities of other organ systems, provides and interprets sensory information about external conditions. Okay? All right. Next, we have the endocrine system. All right. So let's back up just for a second. So nervous system directs immediate responses. This is how you get out of the way of the bull chasing you, or the bus coming down, or you're about to get hit by somebody. They're going to punch you for whatever reason. Okay. This is what we use. The endocrine system, is long-term control or changes. This is like growth hormone in children. How long does it take for people to grow? It takes years, right? Some of us are still not grown up. That's a whole different story. All right, so endocrine, major organs: pituitary gland, thyroid gland, pancreas, adrenal glands, gonads, endocrine tissues, and other systems. Again, you guys need to know where these organs are located. Functions: long-term control, adjust metabolic activity. Anytime you hear metabolism, right? Metabolic activity is how much chemical reactions are happening in your body at any given moment. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay? Controls many structural and functional changes during development. Again, that's like I just said, growth hormone and growing and that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. Next is cardiovascular. Organs are heart, blood, and blood vessels. You see it right there. The heart, the blood, and the blood vessels associated with that. Distributes blood, cells, water, and dissolved materials, including nutrients, waste products, oxygen, carbon dioxide. Distributes heat and assists in control of body temperature. Next, lymphatic. Okay, it is very similar to the veins, the blue ones here. So arteries are red, veins are blue. It's very similar to the veins on this side. In other words, that's at low pressure. The major organs are the spleen, thymus, lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, and tonsils, and its functions defends against infections and disease and returns tissue fluids to the bloodstream. How many guys have been standing? How many guys have been standing in a job that you may do and your feet swell up or whatever? Well, what gets that fluid that's in your legs or your feet, your hands, you can't get that ring off, whatever the deal is, the lymphatic system will bring that fluid back into your cardiovascular system in certain locations, go to certain areas in your cardiovascular. So that's what that stuff. It brings back, returns the tissue fluids to the bloodstream. Okay. All right. Next we have respiratory system. Okay. Nasal cavities. Right. Sinuses, larynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs, alveoli. Again, you need to know what all those are. Okay. Functions: delivers air to the alveoli, sites in the lungs where gas exchange occurs. These are the only place where we have gas exchange occurring is in the alveoli. That's why smoking, anything like that actually damages those sacs, and then that's why people end up with emphysema, which is the damaging of these alveoli, which is the only place that we have gas exchange. So if you're even vaping, by the way, vaping is not good for you. Just so you know, that's your public service announcement for the day. Right? All right. What's the function of your lungs? Delivers air to alveoli sites in the lungs where gas exchange occurs, provides oxygen to the bloodstream, removes what is it, carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide? Right, carbon dioxide, okay? And produces sounds for communication. Obviously, you use your vocal cords, they vibrate to make the sound. All right, major organs. The next one, digestive. We have teeth, tongue, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, liver, gallbladder, pancreas. What's the function? Processes and digests food, absorbs and conserves water, absorbs nutrients, stores energy, reserves. Okay, so that is the digestive system. All right, so from your mouth to your anus is a tube, right? From your mouth to your anus, from go to woe is a tube, from go to woe. Okay, we start digesting up here in the mouth. So as we start to bring the food up, our mouth starts to water. Then as the food hits our mouth, then we have those particular enzymes in our mouth that will actually start liquefying the food, which helps us to chew that with our teeth. Obviously, chew it up, turn it into a bolus, which we swallow. Then our stomach goes through and dissolves it. Okay, so anyway, that's that. Okay, now, what comes out the backside, right? Let's talk about this real quick. Urinary, kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, urethra. Now, urinary system are these organs here. Excretes waste products from the blood, controls water balance by regulating volume of urine production, stores urine prior to voluntary elimination or involuntary. Okay? Anyway, regulates blood ion concentrations and pH. That's kind of important. We'll talk more about that later. So, where do you get rid of solid waste from the body? It's a trick question. It's not here. Okay, it's not in the digestive system. This is stuff you don't use. This is all the plant material that you didn't use. This is all the stuff that didn't get absorbed into your body. What happens is our cells, all our trillions of cells, actually will take that stuff that you eat that gets into the blood that we utilize. It goes through the systems, it goes through the capillary systems, then it gets into the cell. The cell then takes all the proteins and all that stuff and makes it so that we can utilize that to grow, to reproduce. Yes, cells reproduce. Cells are the smallest unit of life. Right? So anything smaller than a cell is not live. Okay? But then everything has a byproduct. Everything that's alive has a byproduct. So anything that's alive, everything like our cells, will have a byproduct of the use. Right? As an organism, I breathe in oxygen, I exhale CO2. Right? So that's a byproduct. I sweat, it comes off my skin. Insensible perspiration, insensible perspiration. But anyway, so this is where the metabolite. So metabolism is all the chemical reactions in the body at any given moment, and the byproduct of metabolism is called metabolites, and those come out of the cell. They get picked up by the lymphatic system and the cardiovascular system, brought back in into the cardiovascular system or run through, and then what happens? The kidneys pick them up, and then they excrete it. Okay, and then we have, we go to the bathroom and we get rid of our metabolites. Okay. Next, of course, male and female reproduction, organs and functions. And of course, if you don't know what the male and female reproductive systems are, again, all right. Okay. All right, so make sure you go through that. That's a lot of material there. It doesn't seem like it. It's only one spotlight, but there is actually a lot of information there. Okay. So you really need to know that you have to have this nailed. You have to know this well. Okay. You have to know where the locations are in the body and all that fun stuff. Okay. So let's go ahead and let me drop out of this. Now this next few pages here is going to go through all these guys, and we don't really need to do that with me. You still need to read this stuff, okay? Don't just leave it for that. Don't just do the spotlight. If you guys aren't reading the chapters, you're going to do poorly in this class, okay? Trust me. Trust me on that, Steve. Okay? So medical terminology, this will actually go through and describe some of the medical terminology, root words, and the like, okay? All right, so prefixes and suffixes, all that fun stuff. Right. So make sure you go through this, make sure that you understand it. You understand why they did medical terminology, and kind of, you don't have to go through and obviously learn all of the different medical terms, but that will come. Okay. All right. So the anatomical terms describe body regions. This is section 1.5. This is section 1.5. Terms describe body regions, anatomical positions, and directions, and body sections. So surface anatomy. And involves locating structures on or near the body surface, familiarity with anatomical landmarks. Okay. Now, you're going to see this guy on the first test. Like, trust me on that. You will see him on the first test. Okay. There are these. Of course, we'll pick what we're going to do. I don't know if I have this in my lab of mastering, but it's important. This is generally in class. This would generally be the quiz, and I would have this guy would be blank, right? And you have to fill all this in. This is basic foundational stuff. You need to know the surface anatomy. This is how we palpate and go, oh look, there's a sore right here. Right here. What is that? That would be a direction. You have to describe it in location. And you say, oh, that's my appendix, or that's my liver, or that's my spleen, or kidney, or whatever. Okay? But you still need to be able to know this, because someone is going to say, listen, I want you to address that hallux down there. The doctor may say that to you in your nursing career, the right hallux, right? Right? That's, of course, right. So, or you might even have to just transcribe it. And trust me, the doctors, nurses, hospitals, they don't really want you to say in, these elementary terms when you're writing out stuff for reports or things of that nature. So we actually have to use some terms that are, we don't have to get crazy, okay? We don't have to get crazy, but we do have to know in case someone does use them, so we're not left wanting, okay? So again, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to go learn this guy right here. Okay, let's talk about what definition stuff. What is anatomical position? Well, it's the picture you just saw there. Okay, that is anatomical position. Standing up, facing forward, palms forward. So palms forward. And of course, this guy is still in anatomical position, right? But he's facing the other way. Right? So make sure that you can describe in language what the anatomical position is. Now, the only thing you have to add to this is not everybody is standing, right? So you will have a patient come in that is not standing, all right? Or come in the emergency room with you, and they may be laying on their back. If they're laying on their back, their face is up, right? Their face is up, and that has a name. It's called supine, right? Now, if you're laying on the ground, how in the world can I get soup into your mouth? You have to be face up. So you have to be supine, okay? All right, so that's just a way for you to help you remember it if you didn't already know that. And of course, the other way where you're face down is what we call prone. All right, that is the prone position. So face up is supine, face down is prone. All right, there it is. All right, anatomical regions. We have the quadrants and regions. Okay, quadrants and regions. So the 4-quadrant system here on the top. So we have, obviously, it's always about patient, right? So put yourself in the position. I see people doing this all the time during tests and things like that. Put yourself in the position. You're looking at the book, you go, what side is that? Right. Okay, so if that's what you have to do, fine. So we have patient's right, patient's left, right upper, right lower, left upper, left lower. So these are quadrants. There's 4 of them based off the umbilicus, okay, or your belly button. Another one of those terms, right? Umbilicus. Okay. Pretty straightforward that. Now we have the abdominal pelvic quadrants, the abdominal pelvic regions is this right here. And there are 9, okay? Here's where some of this medical terminology comes in. So what is hypo? Hypo is below. Chondriac actually refers to the chondral cartilage, coxal cartilage of the ribs. So below the rib region. Okay? So this is right, left, below the rib region. Okay? So this is not hypochondriac like you think you have every disease in the world. Okay? All right, then we have, if you go around the back side, this is the lumbar region. So this is right, left lumbar region. Inguinal right here, this is the inguinal ligament right here. This is where we get inguinal hernias. So this is right and left inguinal region. Okay? And then, of course, we have the last one is the umbilical region. All right. Okay, now, what you do need to know is where the organs are associated with that, okay? Okay, the organs are associated with that. Okay. So, put your organs, again, you have to learn, not only do you have to learn the organs that you have to learn where they are. All right? It doesn't, you'd be terribly embarrassed if someone said, see, the spleen is large and large, right? And you jumped over here, and what side is it on? Left, jumped over here and started in the lid. Someone would probably be like, okay. Why don't you go get me a coffee? Okay. All right. So next is anatomical directions. We have to describe things as they pertain to your patient. Okay, of course, always the patient's left and right. Right? What type of position is this person in? This is called anatomical position. Standing, facing forward, palms at the sides, facing palms out. Okay? All right, so lateral is away from the midline. This is medial. Okay? So this is the midline right here. So working laterally, you're working out across. Okay? Away from the midline. Okay? If you're working toward the midline, you're working medially, right? Until you cross the midline, then you're working laterally. Okay? If you're going up towards where the shoulder or the arm attaches to the shoulder girdle here, right there, this is proximal. Okay? If you're working away towards the fingers, that is distal or distally. Okay? Same with the leg, proximal, distal. Okay? Superior, see all the way from the top right there. Superior is up. Okay? Up, you see it's still up there. Inferior, down here. Inferior is below at lower level towards the feet. Inferior, it's also caudal, going down is caudal. Cranial, cephalic, this term. So obviously cranial is head. Cephalic, that's up, okay? Let's see, caudal is towards the tail, or the coccyx in humans. So anterior or ventral is the anterior side of your chest, is the forward part there, anterior or ventral. So we see sharks, they have ventral fins, whales, ventral fins. Sharks also have a back fin, right, which we all know is called a dorsal. So your butt, how many guys have heard, is called your posterior, right? Posterior is on the back side. where your buttocks is, and also dorsal, same thing. Okay. Now, one other thing here, we got the directional turns as it relates to your skin. So the most superficial organ of your body is called, right, the integumentary system. Okay, the integumentary system is the most superficial. But what is right below the integumentary system? Fat, then muscular system, and of course that is as you go from superficial, you go from superficial to deep. Okay. Now, what you should be able to do is should be able to describe things like the brachium is what as compared to the wrist. So the brachium would actually be more proximal. Okay. All right. So the brachium would be more proximal than the antebrachium, or the pollex, or the digits, anything like that. Okay. Let's move on. This talks about auscultation, is where we actually listen to areas. This is why superficial anatomy is important, so that you can find locations. Okay. Sectional anatomy. All right. So we have planes. All right. Let me describe planes real quick. So we have different planes in the human. Okay. We have the midline right here. Okay. We have this is the what we call a sagittal plane. Remember this all midline. Okay. So this is the sagittal plane. Here it is right here. Okay. Mid-sagittal section is right down the midline. What we talked about before, right? Now, if it's next to, if it comes off of the midline, so in other words, it's not right down the center. If we come off a little bit, it's called parasagittal. And this is a sagittal section, right? Then we have the frontal or coronal plane, which is cuts you from equal parts from front to back, whereas the sagittal plane was parts from left to right. Okay, left to right. And then, of course, we have a transverse plane. The transverse plane will come through and cut across, cutting you from top to bottom. Typically, you see this would be like you see an MRI. Remember, when you look at this interior view of an MRI, you're actually looking up. So if you cut somebody here in the transverse plane, this view, you're actually looking up. Okay, so don't forget that. People will mess that up. Okay, so you're actually looking up. All right, so those are pretty straightforward planes. All right, body cavities of the trunk protect internal organs and allow them to change shape and move. Of course, everybody understands that our internal organs are not static. In other words, they are always moving, contracting. Heart is a muscle, it's moving, right? The digestive system is continually moving. All right, so what we have is we have the thoracic cavity and we have the abdominal pelvic cavity. We actually have vertebral cavity too in the cranial one as well, but for some reason they don't like to put that there. But anyway, so in the thoracic cavity, separated by the abdominal pelvic cavity by the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is what we use to breathe, right? This actually separates these two cavities, okay? In the thoracic cavity, we have the pleural cavity and the pericardial cavity. Now, pleura does not mean two in this case. Okay, so pleura is actually the lung. Okay, you ever heard of pleurisy? Anything like that? Okay, pleuritis. Right? Okay, this is inflammation of this area. But anyway, okay, so pleural cavity, pericardial cavity. Now, what does peri mean? It's around pericardial, around heart cavity. Okay, all right, now. The pleural cavity, remember, how many lungs do we have? We have two, all right? So there's actually two pleural cavities, the right and left. The right and left. Remember what I said before about the view? If this didn't make sense to you, there's right and left, but if you put yourself like this, also that works, right? All right, so what am I asking? What area is between the two pleural cavities, but around the pericardial cavity? That is this yellow area here. That's called the mediastinum. This is an area here for locating the arteries and veins and lymph nodes and things like that have to move up and down your body. Okay? So we have two pleural cavities and one pericardial cavity. Okay? Now, All of our cavities, all of them, all of our things have this kind of setup where you have a visceral layer and a parietal layer, okay? So you see here, someone's putting their hand inside a balloon, right? Now this actually makes a visceral layer, and if you've never heard of visceral, that's actually the organ itself. So visceral layer is what's on the organ itself. The parietal layer is what's on the wall, okay? What's on the wall. So, parietal and visceral. And of course, there's our pericardial sac. Some of you guys have seen our NER stuff right now, so this is what will fill up with blood, cause this to not work well, or not at all. Okay. All right. Okay. Abdominal cavity has a peritoneal cavity, the abdominal cavity, and the pelvic cavity. Okay. So these three make up the abdominal pelvic cavity. All right. And remember what I said was you have to locate the organs involved in this area there. Okay. Now there's some language in here that's kind of confusing, but if you just keep this in mind, this right here, the parietal and visceral layers, so the parietal and visceral layers of each of the organs, when you start going through here, you'll start seeing some of this language, and if you just keep it as it relates, then you'll understand what the language says. Let me jump down here real quick and I'll come back up. Like this, pericardium, visceral layer of serous pericardium. That's not that hard, okay? Visceral layer means what? On the organ. Serous pericardium. And what does serous mean? Serous is a type of fluid, okay? And it is what keeps our internal organs nice and juicy, okay? Our organs need to be juicy, otherwise they will stick, they will be sticky, and they will cause problems. So you can imagine if your intestines couldn't move, what kind of blockage that would create, which would make you not very uncomfortable, right? Anyway, okay. So visceral and parietal layers, serous fluid to keep everything nice and juicy on the inside. All right. So make sure you understand this. Again, I'm going to kind of point out something. Some of you guys have known this. Some of you guys are new to college. Some of you guys are even new to doing things online. Okay? You need to step into the material. There's no way for you to read this section, and not understand what parietal peritoneum is, and just keep going. All right, and keep reading. If you don't understand what this says, you don't understand what this is trying to tell you, the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, how can you continue? You have to step into the material and you have to understand what these are saying to you. If you don't understand the vocabulary, then you need to back up until you figure it out. Right? That's what I'm talking about when you start learning this material. It is incredibly important. You must do that. Okay? All right. So this goes through and describes your different, there's your abdominal, there's your peritoneal, there's your pelvic cavities. Let's move on. Make sure you read all this. Homeostasis, the state of internal balance and continuously regulated. This is the definition of what stuff is that is alive. Homeostasis is dynamic equilibrium. In other words, it continually changes. It's dynamic, right? Moves up and down, but it actually has to have a set point. It has to stay. It has to be someplace where it works. Okay. All right, so homeostatic regulation, autoregulation, extrinsic regulation, a process that occurs when a cell, tissue, organ system adjusts in response to some environmental change. Extrinsic regulation, a process that results from activities of the nervous system or endocrine system. Now remember, what is nervous system? Immediate response. Endocrine system, long-term control. That's very important, okay? All right, so here is a process. So all homeostatic regulation has these three things in common. It must have a receptor. It must have a control center and an effector. Okay, they use the example of the temperature control, your thermostat, right? So the thermostat, we have to have the receptor, which is the thermometer, right? We have to have a control center, which is a thermostat, which then tells the actual air handler upstairs or whatever that is to turn on and start blowing cold air, right? Until it gets cold and then it shuts off. If you get hot, air conditioner back, you get cold, then the heater comes on, right? Same thing. They'll have a receptor, a control center, and an effector, okay? That's the most important. Now, I want to point this out again. Is it important that you draw this and start learning this? This is a waste of time to write this down. These three things are important. That's just to show you. So there's a lot of stuff in here just to give you examples of that. You're wasting your time if you try to write down the system and how it goes through. So just understand the process and what homeostatic regulation is, which is those three things. All right, so the temperature is set at a set point. Remember what I said, what is homeostasis? Two words, dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium, right? Okay, so that we have a set point, okay? So this is for the room, 72 degrees. What's our body temperature at the set point? 98.6. Goes up, we got to cool down. It goes down, we got to warm up. How do you warm up? You get increased muscle contraction, which causes heat, right? How do you cool down? You sweat. All right, so negative feedback opposes variations from normal, whereas positive feedback enhances them. That's a huge thing. So we have homeostatic regulation. There's two types of homeostatic regulation. There is negative feedback, okay? When we control temperature of the body, it's called thermoregulation. Thermoregulation. All right, so negative feedback. So the temperature control in our bodies is a negative feedback loop. Negative feedback opposes variations from normal, where temperature goes up, we cool down, right? Temperature goes down, we warm up. Opposes variation. Positive feedback exaggerates the condition. Does anybody have a description of what a positive feedback loop would be? Childbirth is one of those, right? What happens in childbirth? The uterus starts to squeeze, right? Pushing the baby down. The baby's heart hits the cervix, it sends a signal up to the brain. Posterior pituitary then sends oxytocin down, which causes the uterus to contract harder. The baby's head hits the cervix harder, sends a signal back up to the brain. Oxytocin is released from posterior pituitary, hits the uterus harder, so on and so forth. Okay, until what happens? The baby comes flying out. I got it, right? All right. Blood loss. Blood loss is another example of positive. It exaggerates the condition until it's fixed, which makes sense. If you're bleeding, you want to exaggerate the condition until either one or two things happen. You either stop the blood or you die. Right? Okay, so that is a positive feedback example. I think in the book here we actually have bleeding as the result of that. Okay, now this shows you the negative feedback control of body temperature. It's important that you learn this graph. Is this control? Is this important here? Thermal regulatory centers in the brain, the hypothalamus is just the location in the brain. Not super important, but that's so you know. But it's just talking about the receptor control center and effector. Okay, so we already went through. Here it is. Here's your blood loss. So if you are out of homeostatic regulation for too far or too long, this is how disease starts. Dis-ease, right? This is how it starts. So if you're too far out of equilibrium, that's how you get disease. If you're too far out for too long, you can die, okay? Which makes sense, right? If you're bleeding and you bleed to death, you've been too far too long, you die. All right, so the roles of organ systems in homeostatic regulation are here. I don't expect you to memorize this chart, but I do expect you to read it and understand. If you don't know what these systems are, you have to go back and figure it out. Okay? Body temperature, heat loss, heat production, heat distribution, coordination of blood flow, so on and so forth. Blood, body fluid composition, body fluid volume. Make sure you read that. Make sure you understand what it's telling you. Okay. All right, so that finishes chapter 1. All right, so now listen, you need to do the review questions in the back of the book. I have not decided if it's going to be extra credit, but trust me on this. You need to do these this back of the chapter sections, the review questions. If you don't do them, I won't give you anything at the end of the semester, so just hold on to them. I haven't decided yet, but it doesn't matter. You still need to do them, and the reason I'm telling you that is because they're very, very similar to like questions that I will give you on the test, okay? So I'm not a very one-dimensional test giver, so I'm not going to ask. There's going to be some what is this, what is that, but that's the basics, right? But we need more than that to be good nurses, good doctors, good physical therapists, whatever you're going to be, okay? All right, so make sure that you do these back of the chapter sections and keep them in a little book so that you have them at the end of the semester. What else? Okay. All right, so make sure that you go through that and do all of this, this back stuff. These review questions are here. So again, this is what I was showing you on the thing, all right? So this has got all this information here. Trust me on this, it's very helpful. And by the way, do them all. If you do part of them, I'm not gonna give you any credit, okay? No matter what, even if I decide to. If you only do like the first 24 and these are too hard for you apparently, then I'm not gonna give you any credit, okay? So if you do them, there's a good chance that you'll have some extra credit at the end of the semester. If you do them and there's not extra credit, we'll just know that you did them for your grade, okay? All right, so with that being said, that's the end of this topic, and I will do chapter 2 here in a second, which is chemistry.